our choices around food is so much of it is habitual. About 70% of the food we eat, we've made a very subconscious decision about it. Some of the most commonly reported unwanted habits around food are snacking when we're not hungry, going for like a second helping of dessert most nights.
How do we identify those triggers that lead to emotional eating?
It's just being self-aware. We have to know what's coming, tracking the pattern, and then stop it before it gets there. The magic is in the sustainability. It's in the consistency, not the intensity. Most important is self-compassion.
You don't show yourself self-compassion. You actually become disappointed in yourself and you're like, oh, I messed up, whatever.
I worked with someone who hadn't exercised for decades. I said to him, just start by putting your shoes on. That's all I want you to do.
Gina, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Such a pleasure to be with you, Amal.
I'm so excited. We had like a little short conversation before actually recording the podcast. And I feel like this always happens. All the valuable stuff comes out before you hit record. But there is so much about habit building that I want to dive into. So let's get straight into it. And let's start by you telling our audience a little bit about you, your background, your journey, and what you do today.
Yeah, cool. So I'm Dr. Gina Cleo. I'm a habit expert. I research habits, like why we do the things we do, how to create sustainable change, how to break the unwanted habits in our life. I started my career as a dietitian and I honestly loved what I did. But I just found that for myself and a lot of the clients I worked with, we were only achieving like short-term results. We would like achieve exactly what we wanted to, and then we'd end up right back where we started. And that's so totally myself as well. And I really struggled with like, you know, when you sometimes say you're going to do something and you end up doing something else, like I'm going to get up and exercise tomorrow, and then I'd find myself scrolling on Facebook Marketplace for 2 hours. And I was so frustrated with myself. So I got really fascinated with, you know, what motivates us. And so I ended up doing a PhD in habits and understanding more about the brain. And then from there, I've written 2 courses on habits. One's for coaches and one's for everyday people to understand themselves better. I've written a book called The Habit Revolution, and I do a lot of corporate speaking as well around Australia and around the world.
That's incredible. I didn't know that being a habit expert was a thing. So it's cool. It's like really cool. And it's like all like new to me.
Yeah, there's not many of us at all. I think there's like 10 in the world, maybe 2 in Australia.
Wow, that's insane. And being a dietitian, so starting your journey in like the food space and nutrition and then moving into becoming a habit expert, there is definitely a connection between the two. And I really want to dive into that and habit building in general, but just like food and your eating habits and what role that plays in like living a healthy life is something that I'd love to explore. So let's just start by talking about habits in general. So we often think of habits as like these small behaviors like brushing our teeth, going to the gym and so on. But they, like I said, often have a huge impact on our health. So what's your perspective on all of this?
I mean, one habit leads to another, right? And like, let's say, for example, you have a drink of alcohol in the evenings. That's going to impact your sleep. And if you haven't had a great sleep, you're less inclined to get up and exercise. You're less inclined to make good and healthy eating choices. And now you're more tired and you're more stressed throughout the day. Your self-control, your willpower is much lower because you haven't slept well. And there's this cascade that happens. And on the opposite end though, if say you had a really good night's sleep, you're much more motivated in the morning to move. That's going to make you more inspired to eat better. You're going to feel better. You're going to focus more. And so our habits are so important. We can sometimes, I think, overemphasize the value of big changes and underestimate the value of tiny little choices that we make in our everyday life. And it's those tiny choices done consistently. That's where the magic happens.
I'm so curious to know what a day in a life looks like for you as a habit expert. Like, what is your routine like? What are some of those habits that you've built that work for you, like that choice that you make every single day?
It's so funny because I'm actually not a habitual person at all, but I do have some foundations that are absolutely non-negotiables. My day really starts the night before with an awesome night's sleep. So I'm always in bed by like 8:30, and the hour before that, I've dimmed all the lights. I'm not on my phone. I'm not looking at screens. And I take just a really easy, long time to just get ready and wind down for bed. If I've had a good sleep, I know the next day is going to just be nice and smooth. But in the mornings, I love to move my body. So I'll hydrate first thing. I drink plenty of water. We know that even 1 to 2% of dehydration can cause just like lack of focus, concentration, etc. So I hydrate, then I move my body in whatever way I feel like that day. Sometimes it's Pilates, sometimes it's weight training, sometimes it's a walk. And then a good healthy breakfast, so lots of protein. And then the rest of the day is pretty fluid. So I'll either be doing a couple of hours work or hanging out with my family. So like the day is kind of fluid, but my mornings and evenings I'm a little bit more rigid with.
Honestly, sounds so great. I wish I had a little more of a stricter sleep routine because it has the biggest impact on your day. And we don't realize that, right? Because just like you said, if you have a good sleep routine, you wake up knowing that the day is going to be smooth and you're more inclined to get up and do a workout and whatever it may be. And so like when you wake up and you're feeling tired, you're like, I'm just going to hit snooze. I don't need to do my workout today. I'm just going to sleep for a little bit longer. So I'm actually curious in talking about just the extremes of habit building. You see that building habits has that positive impact, right? But then on the other end of the spectrum, someone that has like a very obsessive personality that really like leans into those like good habits, which is like exercising and so on, and like eating like, whole foods, unprocessed, like, even avoids anything processed at all times, 100% of the time. What is your perspective on that and how the brain like really, I guess, responds to that? Because I think, habit building is so important and it's something that, we all need to do it in our lives, build these like good habits, make these better choices and so on. But what happens when we take it too far?
Yeah. Habits are such an individualized thing. A habit that's not so good for somebody can be great for someone else. Like let's take eating dessert every day. That's not so great for a type 2 diabetic, for example. But someone who's recovering from disordered eating, that could actually be part of their treatment. It could be a sign of success and progress, and in which case that wouldn't be such a bad thing. When we're looking at the words that you mentioned are like rigid or really like insane or intense habits, for some people it gives them a sense of control and doesn't cause stress, whereas for other people, having to live that kind of lifestyle can be quite distressing because unprocessed food isn't always available, or, there could be times where you just don't have access to the things that you really want to do. And if that's causing stress, then it's actually causing harm and you're better off being just a little bit more flexible. We sit on a spectrum between being quite rigid and being really flexible. And research shows that the best place to be is somewhere in the middle, where we're not too fluid, that we just don't have any sort of routine at all, but we're also not too rigid, that we struggle with flexibility or with pivoting when things change, because life always changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying that when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I don't want to go to the gym today, it's okay.
Look, I'm a big believer in self-care, 100%. If it's out of laziness, it's different to out of rest.
Laziness. You touched on something that I really want to dive into, which was, I guess, habits around eating. You spoke about disordered eating and, for example, saying that someone that, has experienced that and is eating dessert every night, that could be a way of progress, right? So let's talk about the role of habits around food and the impact. I'd love to just dive into that. Like, what's your perspective on all of that?
I mean, we know that the foods that we eat impacts the rest of our health and our energy and our overall well-being, right? What's interesting about our choices around food is so much of it is habitual. About 70% of the food we eat is we've made a very subconscious decision about it. And that includes the types of food that we eat, how much food we eat, like we're used to having a certain amount on our plate, the timing of our day. Take midday. We often eat lunch around that time. It's not necessarily that we're hungry. It's just like midday. Or when we're on an airplane and everybody gets a snack. And now I'm always fascinated. I'm like, is everybody hungry at the same time? And it's impossible that we are. But, the role of our environment plays a really big impact on our food choices. But, yeah, I mean, food is it's the well of life, right? It's the well of our wellness, if that even makes sense. So it makes a really huge impact on everything.
What are some bad habits you've seen people struggle with?
Some of the most commonly reported unwanted habits around food are snacking when we're not hungry and going for like a second helping of dessert most nights. You're like, guilty.
Yeah, guilty.
And we all
the time.
do it though, you know, like we don't just eat when we're hungry. That we would be robots. We eat for all sorts of reasons, and a lot of it is emotional. So it makes complete sense. You know, food gives us dopamine, chewing gives us dopamine, sugar gives us dopamine, and that makes us feel good in the moment and distracts us from whatever it is that we're trying to avoid.
How do we identify those triggers that lead to emotional eating? Because I know that a lot of our audience that are listening in right now would be experiencing emotional eating. It's one of the biggest challenges in, you know, those that are embarking on a weight loss journey, that emotional eating is something that they just can't overcome. So how do we identify those triggers?
Yeah, I mean, this requires a bigger team of experts to really help someone recover from emotional eating. But the triggers are really, it's actually more about identifying when you're emotionally eating. So our habits have these 5 primary triggers, and all of our habits fall into one or more of these. And it's the time of day, it's the place that you're in, it's what you've just done beforehand, so the preceding event, our emotions, and our social situation, so the people that we're around. You might find that you're emotionally eating when you're bored or when you're stressed or when you've just had an uncomfortable conversation with somebody. It could be because whenever you walk into the kitchen, there's like a whole bunch of cashews sitting there. And so you'll just grab that because it's an easy thing to do. And so you want to look at the times that you're emotionally eating when you're not hungry, and really noticing hunger, fullness, you know, how am I feeling? And then writing down, where am I? What time of day is it? How am I feeling? Who am I around? What have I just done beforehand? And being really mindful of your triggers. That's how you can then track what's going on and understand yourself a bit better.
So it's really like that self-awareness piece, right? It's, you know, a lot of people, I guess, when they are emotionally eating, will tend to lead into like a binge eat, right? So it's like excessive eating, you know, outside of their control and whatnot. And so are you recommending, you know, the first step is really to become self-aware of the situation? It's like, okay, I'm doing what I don't want to be doing, and now I need to really just like take note and document, you know, all of the points that you've just mentioned as a form of self-awareness.
That's exactly it. It's just being self-aware. And it's easier said than done, because our habits often happen automatically and subconsciously. You know, you sit in the car and you put your seatbelt on. You don't have to consciously think of that. It's something that happens. And that's the very essence of our habits, is that they are subconscious. And oftentimes, and look, I've been a big time emotional eater in the past. It was probably what got me interested in studying dietetics in the first place. And what I found was I'd be halfway through a packet of chips before realizing what I was doing. And I'm like, Gina, you had to literally walk over to the pantry, get the chips, open it, go sit down on the couch, and you've only realized halfway through. And that's because all of those previous behaviors were completely automatic and subconscious.
So how do we, or I guess like what tips can you provide our listeners to managing stress and emotional eating? So I know you've mentioned like documenting it, but how do you, I guess, become aware? Like what are some things that you can do to be like, okay, hold on, I've just realized. So how do you realize before you get to the pantry, not after you've eaten half a bag of chips?
Yeah. I mean, once you've tracked it for a while, you'll start to see patterns. You'll start to say, okay, 3 o'clock seems to be a trigger time, or after dinner is a real trigger time, or when I'm really bored. And so you can start to preempt those moments. And it's just such a powerful thing to do. You can say, I know today at 3 o'clock, I'm probably going to want to lean into a binge. So this is what I'm going to do instead, and plan to be out of the house, or plan a walk with a friend, or do an activity, like really change the routine that you normally do. Get yourself out of that environment and preempt it. I think that's, you know, it's funny because I've got a dog, and my dog trainer always says to me, you have to preempt what she's going to do before she does it. So if she's got this thing where she like barks at motorbikes. So she's like, when you see a motorbike, you've got to hold her back and give her a little command before the motorbike comes across. And it's the only thing that works. when the motorbike's already there and she's like going for it, there's nothing I can do to stop her. But if I preempt it and I can pull her back, then she stops. And it's the same in humans. It's hilarious. We have to know what's coming by tracking the pattern and then stop it before it gets there.
So what if we don't stop it before it gets there, right? Motorbike has passed. We're barking.
Yeah.
We're half a bag of chips in. What do you usually recommend, to someone that has, experienced emotional eating or binge eating or stress eating? What are some habits we can do after the fact?
Yeah. I love this question so much, Amal, because, when you give advice to someone, they often think, okay, I just need to do this. But it's not actually a matter of if you fall off the wagon. It's a matter of when. Habits are very much a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Whether you're creating a new one or breaking an old one, our brain loves doing what we've always done. And so any kind of change is actually a bit of a struggle sometimes, especially at the start. So the first thing I think is huge and most important is self-compassion. It's going, this is part of the process. It's not if, it's when I have a setback. And this is just one of those moments. Self-compassion is so powerful. And then from there, instead of waiting to Monday or your birthday or next month, just start in that moment. Go, I don't have to finish the rest of the packet of the chips. I used to do this thing where, and I know a lot of people do this, like you have a roll of chocolate and you're like, better eat the rest of the block so it's no longer in the house.
That's my boyfriend.
Yeah.
He does that. He does that.
Yeah. And the idea is don't do that. Like it's okay to go, hey, I've had a row or half a block and that's not necessarily what I wanted to have. And that's okay. I'm going to put the rest away. Have some self-compassion. Everybody does this. And just go on with your day.
Yeah, because I feel like, the way that someone responds to, a moment like that, which can happen in so many different ways, whether it's like emotional eating, not working out, whatever it may be, something that they put so much pressure on themselves not to do or like do, and they don't do it and they don't show up like they wanted to show up. I feel like what you do after that can lead to whether you'll get back on track or not.
Completely.
And people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So like, for example, in like the instance of emotional eating and binge eating, you don't show yourself self-compassion. You actually become really, I guess, disappointed in yourself and you're like, oh, I messed up, whatever. I'm going to go and do 2 hours of cardio tomorrow and I'm going to cut my calories and I'm going to starve myself because I'm going to undo all of that damage. But they don't realize that that's putting them back in the same position of that cycle.
Totally. And the real damage of that is self-efficacy, which is the belief in our own ability to achieve a task, is the number one predictor of success. And when we have a setback and then we start to see ourselves as a failure or someone who just can't stick to new habits or doesn't have the ability to, we're not just changing the course of that day, we're changing the course of our future because we're now damaging the self-belief that we have in ourselves to be able to achieve things. And it can be a really horrible place to be because then we just stop having goals and ambitions and aspirations because we know we're not going to achieve them anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Your mindset plays such a big part in all of this.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about breaking habits and building habits. So let's start with breaking habits because you've spoken about breaking habits. So what are some steps someone can take in order to break the bad habits?
So there's 2 proven ways you can break bad habits. I mentioned before that all our habits are triggered by something. And so one of the ways is to avoid the trigger if possible. If going to a certain shop causes you to do something that you don't want to do or sitting in a certain spot does the same, if you can avoid it, I'd say try to avoid it. And then if there's no trigger, there's no habit. So it's a really nice and easy way to to break some of those patterns. The other way is to preempt the trigger for your unwanted habit and swap your unwanted habit for something you prefer to do. So, for example, if you don't want to eat the whole block of chocolate, you can say, rather than eat a whole block of chocolate, I'm going to do this. And then you insert desired habit into that area. Our brain does not like when we say, I'm not going to do that anymore because we're now subtracting something and our brain doesn't really like doing it. It's like saying, don't press the big red button. Or
and you press the red big,
of course, we
big
always
red button.
press the button. So our brain doesn't like that. So it's much better to say, I'm going to swap this with that, or I'm going to do this instead.
I love that. My when I was on this like low histamine diet, just to like help with like hives, I actually couldn't have coffee anymore. And it was just so habitual, right? Like I'd wake up, I'd have coffee, and I felt like that was probably the hardest part of the experience. Not the diet that came with it. It was like the no coffee. And my boxing trainer, I was like ranting about it, like not having coffee. And he's like, well, instead of removing, why don't you just replace?
Nice.
And it's exactly what you've just said, right? Yeah. It's like not saying, no, you can't have this, but I'm just going to have this instead.
Yeah.
So it's like, instead of having the coffee in the morning, why don't you start by having, you know, a herbal tea or electrolytes or something? And it made it just far more easier.
Oh, so good.
So yeah, I stand by I know it's proven, but I also
I love it. Because sometimes as well, it's the ritual that you like. It's the ritual of having a drink and making it. And there's sometimes other things. It's not necessarily the caffeine. It could be like the social element, all these other things that we don't need to like restrict or avoid. We just need to change how it looks a little bit.
Absolutely. So let's talk about building habits. So I know that a lot of our listeners are either looking to, I guess, maybe start working out, like going to the gym, or build better habits when it comes to food, just becoming healthier, like habits that surround, you know, living a healthy lifestyle. So how does someone build a habit?
You know, one of the most common pitfalls I see is people start with really big ambitions and they want to achieve everything at once. But we know through research that we're better off just setting one goal at a time and finding automaticity in that, which is a state where it starts to feel more natural and more automatic, and then build another habit and then build another one. You want to also start really small, like so small you feel like you can't say no to doing it. So if you want to start a gym going habit, instead of saying, I'm going to go with 5 days and you know, highlight all the classes you want to do, like a lot of us do. I know that I've done that so many times before.
I do that still to this day.
Actually, same. But just start with one. Just say, I'm going to go to the gym 1 day this week or 2 days. Like everyone's start small is going to look different. I worked with someone who hadn't exercised for decades and he wanted to start exercising, and it was a really daunting idea. And I said to him, just start by putting your shoes on. That's all I want you to do. Just a week of just putting your sneakers on.
Wow.
And from there, he went out to his letterbox, and then he went walking down the road and then round the block. And then eventually he signed up to do a 10-kilometer race. And he said to me, Gina, if you told me I'd be doing a 10K race, I'd think you're crazy, because he hadn't exercised in so long. But you gave me something so small. I knew I couldn't say no to doing it. And then we naturally build on our habits.
That is so crazy, because I've never thought of it being that small. Because like small is like, okay, instead of 5 days, I'll go 3 days, right?
Yeah.
But something as small as just putting on your sneakers or like your sports shoes, and then it just leads to building that habit, because you can't say no. Wow, that's so incredible.
If you think like the very hardest part of doing anything is starting.
Yeah.
Starting's always the hardest. So if you can make starting a habit, then the rest just flows from there.
I guess, you know, like how do you get that balance of wanting to be somewhere quicker, right? Because, and then also giving yourself the time and space to build that habit, because a lot of people are looking to build these habits because there's an end goal in mind. So it's like, I have this goal, let's say I want to lose 10 kilos, and these are the habits that I need to do daily or weekly or whatever in order to get me to that 10 kilo weight loss. And so that's why they do the extremes. They're like, I'm going to sign up to the gym, I'm going to highlight every gym class and register 7 days and whatever, and they just fail. So how do you get that balance of like giving yourself the time to do it, but then and building that habit, and then also getting to the result quicker?
I know, it's such a challenge, hey, and I'm someone who wants to achieve everything yesterday. So I totally get it. And sometimes those little things feel so tedious, and it's like, oh, is this even doing anything? But it is. And we know again through research that big challenging things, you might stick at it for a couple of days or a week or a month if you're super disciplined. But the reality is you're going to end up right back where you started. Whereas if you just start small and you stay consistent, you're going to outrun the people that have been trying to do these big, grand things that are not sustainable. Like, the magic is in the sustainability. It's in the consistency, not the intensity. And so I just keep coming back to that, which is probably why I find that a lot of the people that are super interested in habits and willing to subscribe to the ideas and the theories behind it are the ones that have tried the intensity and have failed over and over again. And they're like, all right, we'll try something else. And then that's where you get the results.
That takes me to a question that I'm like dying to ask you about a habit challenge, which is the 75 hard.
Yeah.
And I just want to get your perspective on that, because the reason why people do the 75 hard is it's mental toughness, right? But it also is to build those habits. I think, you know, and I could be wrong, isn't it like 60 days or so to actually build a habit? So I can understand why they've targeted like 75.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that? So I think, you know, the criteria, and look, I'm no 75 hard expert, but I'm just going to guess. I think it's like daily progress photos, 4 liters of water, exercise twice. So 2 45-minute workouts a day, one being outdoors, no cheat meals, and then read 10 pages a day. I think, I don't know if I'm missing anything.
Yeah.
No one at me if I am, but just tell me, I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts on those types, like challenges and whatnot?
What you've described is like pure intensity, and I don't like it. I would personally never do it. I feel like it sets a lot of people up to fail. And we know the failure rate of the 75 hard is like 90-something%.
Yeah.
It's huge. I don't like it at all, because essentially there's so many things about it that are actually physiologically not appropriate. Like training twice a day for 45 minutes might be great for an athlete who's, you know, taking supplements and steroids or whatever they're doing to support their body. But for most people, we need a bit of rest. And also, what if you've had a terrible night's sleep? Like, the recommendation is actually not to do intense exercise.
That's why I don't exercise in the morning. I'm just kidding.
Yes. There's just so much about it that I think it's obviously not sustainable. And so I have huge qualms about that. On the other end, if someone's doing it to simply challenge themselves and they're not looking at building sustainability, they're just wanting to challenge themselves to do something intense, fine, do that. But when you're putting this spin on it of these are going to be habits, I'm telling you now, they're not going to be. Because who has capacity to live that kind of lifestyle every single day for the rest of their life, or at least most of their life? It's not possible.
Do you think that it causes more harm? And when I ask that, I mean in the sense that post 75 hard, do you think that, not the rebound breaks, you know, it's not a weight loss challenge, it's, you know, a mental toughness challenge, but do you think that because it's definitely not sustainable to be living life, like you said, unless you're an athlete or whatever, to be following those, you know, that criteria daily, do you think that the rebound rate, or like, you know, what could happen after is more detrimental than even participating in the first place? Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, when you look at the failure rate, I think that's where the damage is. It's saying you don't have mental toughness, you don't have what it takes. And now you're seeing all these photos and before and afters of other people who have achieved it. And what's that going to do for your own self-esteem or your own sense of worth or your self-efficacy? It's not going to do you any good at all. So I actually think it's within the actual challenge that causes so much of the damage before the challenge is even finished.
So interesting. I want to talk about other, like, I guess, methods and things that are currently trending right now. One being GLP-1 medications for weight loss. And I know that you live and breathe sustainability, which, you know, I love to hear, which is great. So tell me, what are your thoughts on the like GLP-1 medications like Ozempic that are currently available, and people, I guess, taking that in order to achieve weight loss?
Yeah. You know, I don't hate on Ozempic at all. I think it could be an awesome tool and truly a life-changing tool for some people. But I use the word tool extremely intentionally because it's just one tool. I think, you know, and again, we know that there's a huge rebound rate with Ozempic and every other weight loss drug that's out there. It's actually similar rebound rates to diets. And so, you know, you've got the short-term success and then long-term you end up where you started or even worse. So I think it's one of those things where I think there should be a lot more coaching along with taking it. whether it's through a dietitian or an exercise physiologist or a GP or whoever it is, to help someone understand or to implement really like healthier habits while they're doing it. Here's me talking about habits. Of course I am, but
Of course,
to
always.
make it more sustainable, you know, here's this period of time where you're going to be losing weight. You're going to feel more comfortable in your body potentially. You're going to feel more mobile and agile. Implement some exercise, get better night's sleep, change the things that you eat during this time, because you have the tool that's allowing you to do that.
I love that. I think you said that so well. Calling it a tool, I guess, rather than just like a solution, is so powerful, because a lot of people think, oh, I'll just take, you know, Ozempic and lose weight. But one, to get the most, I guess, the effectiveness of it, like take advantage of the full journey that you're on and get the best outcome while you're on it, but then also sustain it is key, because it's one thing to lose the weight, but if you can't keep it off, why are you doing it in the first place? And you can only really keep it off if you're building the habits to support that lifestyle, really.
Yeah.
Gina, this has been such a great chat. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. I feel like I could ask so many more questions about habit building that I could benefit from. But let's just end this with you just telling our audience just one tip. So if there's one thing that they could take away from this conversation today when it comes to just habit building or just habits in general, what is that one piece of advice that you would give to them that they can start as of today?
Whether you're creating new habits or you're breaking old habits, don't forget the trigger. If you're creating a new habit, you have to give yourself a trigger for it, where it's the time of day, the place you're in. So don't just say, I want to exercise more. Say, I will exercise when I wake up, or I will exercise after work. So give yourself a trigger to do that. And then again, don't forget the triggers for the habits that you're trying to break. I'd say that's probably one of the biggest things.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gina. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on this show.
Thanks for having me, Amal. Always a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I loved being a part of it, and I'll see you at the next one.